Hello there, good morning. I'm going to study 1 Corinthians chapter 11, beginning verse 2 to all the way to verse 16. This particular passage is very contentious, considering today's context when we have to be very gender sensitive, where there is so much of exploitation of women and there is so much of bias against women. It's a male-dominated society. So how do you read this passage? You have to be very careful when you read certain passages here. Like when Paul writes in chapter 11, 1 Corinthians chapter 11, verse 4, every man who prays or prophesies with his head covered dishonors his head, and every woman who prays or prophesies with her head uncovered dishonors her head. It is just as though her head were shaved. If a woman does not cover her head, she should have her hair cut off. And if it is a disgrace for a woman who have to her hair cut or shaved off, she should cover her head. Then again, you read in verse 8, for man did not come from woman, but woman from man. Neither was man created for a woman, but woman for man. I want you to draw your attention again, a few more verses, beginning at verse 12. For as woman came from man, so also man is born of woman, but everything comes from God. Judge for yourself. Is it proper for a woman to pray to God with her head uncovered? Does not the very nature of things teach you that if a man has long hair, it is a disgrace to him? But that if a woman has long hair, it is her glory. It's a very difficult passage, especially you are preaching in this modern context in our churches. What is the situation? What is the context? If you take the text out of context, it will not make sense. Imagine a church in the first century where believers have gone a little bit chaotic, and some of the worshippers is almost like practicing like pagan worshippers. In pagan worships, the woman will be possessed by the spirit, and she will be dancing with her hair open, and she will be behaving chaotic in the worship. That's how the cult worship and the pagan worship used to be in the first century. Another scenario, imagine a woman who is keeping her hair long, decorated with flowers. And in that first century, when a woman who is in public showing her hair with flowers and decorations, often perceived as someone who is a prostitute. Those are the two case scenarios. And Paul is concerned about the order of worship, how the worship should be more dignified. And this instruction is particularly given to men and women who are married. Woman who is married to a man who is married. How should be their relationship? How there should be an orderliness in worship. It's not about hierarchy, who is head and who should subordinate whom and who should lead others. It's not about the hierarchy. It's not about the dominion. So it should not be read from gender biased perspective. But it should be read from that context when Paul is trying to resolve an issue in the first century, particularly when the worship is chaotic and woman has taken over, not even respecting, not even consulting, or even not even discussing with her husband, and she begins to prophesy without even discussing that with. So there can be a relational problem, and that is why Paul is trying to bring orderliness. And that's why he says, now I want you to realize that the head of every man is Christ, and the head of the woman is man. So even man needs to behave properly because he has a head, and so also woman should behave because she is connected. She has a headship of a man to whom she is married. Every man who prays for or prophesies with his head covered dishonors his head, and every woman who prays or prophesies with her head uncovered dishonors her head. Remember, Paul is speaking in a context, in the Jewish context, where men used to always cover their heads. But he says, no, man doesn't have to cover his head, but woman has to cover his head, because that's what was cultural also for women, to not display the beauty of her hair publicly, but her beauty is not used in any way to distract man, but beauty is covered for man because he belongs to her husband. And that's the practice. And so in that cultural practice, Paul is using the culture and the norms of the society, and then he says this is what will be perceived by the non-Christians, non-Jewish Gentiles, how you will worship, how you will cover your head. And so he is a bit strong when he says, if a woman does not cover her head, she should have her hair cut off, because that's what would be perhaps the Gentiles would see her as disgrace. Either she is a prostitute or she is possessed by the spirit who is worshiping like a pagan. So for the Jews, it will be not seen as very dignified, and that is the context. But remember, he also holds man accountable. He says, for as woman came from man, so also man is born of woman. So man also should be dignified in the way that worship. And so Paul says, judge for yourself, is it proper for a woman to pray to God with her head uncovered? So what is not so much about attire, not about what one should wear, but is about the orderliness and the chaos, is about the perception, what the people outside, as Christianity was just in the first century, in its initial stage, people were looking already so critically, judging. It is so important that for them, they must not only practice right, but also create the perception right in the context of that culture, how they perceive what they see. So Paul was concerned about orderliness in the worship, dignified worship, not so much about the hierarchy, not so much about putting one gender over the other. I hope as you hear this passage and as you read this passage, you interpret correctly and you preach in the church to encourage both, admonish both man and woman to be a dignified worshiper. May God bless you and have a wonderful day. Bye-bye.